I see folks are now able to view them and are looking at them. So remember, while you're viewing the module, be thinking about what group of learners that it would be best aligned for, and how could you incorporate this type of technology-enhanced learning experience meaningfully for them. So let's start coming back and start thinking about a little report out. Did we want Arizona to start that? Is there anyone here? Oh,
Nope.
I'm sorry.
Nope, Minnesota will start. and I have Susan Benish here, and her table was able to pull up the module, and they went through it. As a reminder, Minnesota was looking at the communication module. So, Susan, Excellent. You were telling us what learners you thought might be best appropriate for this.
Yes, for this module, we thought it was very basic. With the beginning, it was very interactive. There was a lot of things moving on the screen as it was going through. We thought it would be very engaging for new employees at their orientation or just at a good base level class before you go on to future more difficult, challenging cases, I guess, is a good way to say it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to throw it to Florida now. Catherine, do you have anyone at your site that you could ask for their feedback? And Catherine, if you're talking, we can't hear you, so.
Jocelyn, you want to go from here? We can't hear anything either, Heather.
Okay, we'll throw it to Arizona.
Thanks, Heather. I think in Arizona, the general consensus is they will review these videos at another time. When
Wait a minute.
They are not distracted and have more time. You want to talk? Oh, listen, I got a good sport here. Go ahead.
What exactly is the question?
Hold on.
So we're supposed to describe them? Yeah. Well, I think the 4 habits are the IPEC core competencies, and what's great about the module is it puts a definition to those, gives you examples of what attributes are for each competency. So I think in the abstract, if you were to look at this, you say values and ethics. Well, I don't know what that means in the context of interprofessional education and collaboration, but here it gives you some examples. So work with individuals of other professions to maintain a climate of mutual respect and shared values. And so you can kind of take that and use that definition to start to define what that means in your organization, the team you're working in, what that means for the goal that you're, or the outcome goal. So I think this module is just a great framework for defining those core competencies.
Yes, and that's Arizona improvisation right there live on
Thank you,
Wednesday
Amelia.
night.
We might know something.
Back
Yes.
to you, Minnesota.
Yes, and.
Yes, and I'm going to throw it to Florida, who I think now has a microphone.
Maybe. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Go ahead, Zach.
Zach gave it to me. I'm Tara Brigham. I'm the medical librarian on the Jacksonville, Florida campus. And viewing the roles and responsibility module, I think it's a great, kind of as the counterpart in Rochester said, great for new employees. And it really does set up a nice framework of that people can view maybe at their leisure. They do seem a little bit, well, they're pretty short, but I think maybe sometimes it's hard to keep people's attention if there's something else going on, if email's open or whatever. But definitely it helps communicate the different roles and how people can contribute in the wider context, which is nice that they set up a framework like that.
Back to you, Rochester.
Oh, and I have Stacy Johnson here, who's going to do a bit of a report out from our virtual participants.
Looks like we have
Wonderful.
two top comments here. One was from Brad Karen, who said communication may be valuable for learners just before starting clinical rotations. And again, the module that we reviewed was what is IPE? And the other observation was, I think it would be effective to lead a face-to-face discussion based on the content provided in the What is IPE module with people from various disciplines.
Great. Wonderful. And so, kind of wrapping that up, we heard, some wonderful generalities about the different types of information you can glean from this. Lots of examples used and context provided for these core competencies, and looking at how different professions contribute. But then some great thinking about very specific learners, looking at new employees as a very unique set of individuals that you are using these as an onboarding tool for new employees. I think that's a wonderful example. And then learners before they begin their clinical rotations. Again, a very wonderful specific example of where some of these might be able to fit. And so that's that piece I talked about at the beginning about being able to critically assess where these existing ready-to-use tools and activities that you might find online fit with your learners meaningfully. So thank you so much for going through all of that with me. I want to thank Alyssa and Heather and Stacy and Amy and Bella and Katie and everyone else at Mayo Clinic for inviting us to come and present to you today and for putting on this whole thing. Thank you.
Michael, that was fantastic, and we want to thank you for providing us both a good education, being a good communicator, as well as providing a really wonderful wealth of resources. And thank you, and thank ASU for making those available to us. All right, so not too many groans now. I have been known to have a lot of bad dad puns, but this is the lead into our next two presenters, Dr. Ryan Craner and Dr. David Siemens. And they're going to show us how they designated and designed and facilitated an IPE experience of epic proportions. Dr. Craner.
He used my joke before I had a chance to. Dang it. Okay, so this is kind of what we're going to talk about. The use of simulation-based education to help with transition of a new electronic medical record or electronic health system, pick whatever you want to call it. Disclosures, oh, we removed that. Luckily, I don't have any, so you don't have to worry about it. So let me go back one. Here's what we're going to talk about briefly, or at least what I'm going to talk about briefly today. So I work a lot in the Simulation Center as a co-director here, and we're looking at how can simulation help with implementation of a medical record. So we're going to go over quickly kind of the background and the rationale and what we did, and then the survey itself of how we're going to assess if it made a difference. So the real start of this happened that here in Arizona, we changed medical record, about, 7, 8, 9 years ago, and it was kind of painful. And Dr. Siemens with the Sim Center was saying, is there any way we can make this less painful? Is there anything that we can do to try to help this transition, especially in the perioperative environment, which, even though it seems pretty simple to go from a pre-op bed to an OR and then to a PACU bed, is pretty complex. So it initially started out, is there a way to make this easier for our practitioners and less of a headache? And then afterwards, we were looking into it, and there's really not much evidence or data out there regarding how to do that. There is some smaller studies that say, for example, the new hires. So if you run a new hire through a simulation-based training, then it may make their transition to practice a little easier in terms of medical errors and how to run the chart and how to do the record. But there's nothing about, especially something this vast, about implementing a whole new system all at once. And again, we may all still be licking our wounds to some degree regarding the implementation of Epic as it went. So the rationale and what we were trying to assess is if simulation training made it essentially easier for the people that work in the perioperative environment. Did it make it easier for our nurses? Did it make it easier for our anesthesia care teams, the nurse anesthetists and the anesthesiologists? Did it make it less stressful for our PACU nurses? So did going through a simulation scenario make it easier? So here's kind of how it laid out. On the left side of the picture, you can see we actually set up an anesthesia machine, an Epic monitor, a mannequin, and then on the right side you can see we had a standardized patient with a pre-op nurse, an anesthesiologist, all trying to practice and actually do the whole flow of what it's like both to do it in real time and make it work on I would say on paper, but it's not, but on task. So here's how we did it. Hospital employees, perioperative setting, everybody was given a standard training regarding Epic, right? We all went through some standard modules, went to the computer lab, tucka some stuff, looked at our course director and said, oh yeah, I got this. In Arizona, we were offered additional experience, just like I mentioned. The employees in the perioperative setting were given a chance to go into, we actually isolated a pre-op bay, had a mannequin, we had a standardized patient, and they were given the opportunity to go through and actually practice an intake from a standardized patient, translating that intake to the medical record, and kind of working through the process. And I'll go through it here in a little bit more with the slides. So the simulation was designed to help with these crucial handoffs, both between disciplines, nursing and anesthesia, as well as like key care points, right? Transition from pre-op to intra-op, from intra-op to recovery area. So here's an example. You can see how it looked out. So we have our standardized patient there, and then the preoperative nurse in the left jacket, in the black jacket to the left. We have an anesthesiologist standing there to the right with the CRNA to his right, practicing the intake or the initial kind of assessment for anesthesia. Not only doing the usual questions, but also trying to figure out how to translate it and put it into a record. And as we learned, and as I thought about, Epic reminds me of my grandfather's tool shed. Like everything is there. The question is can you find it, right? So this was kind of part of this process of getting the data and getting the information, the problem list, all that stuff is there, but how to translate it into something meaningful and useful for what we're going to do. Then here's this other part of the handoff, standardized patient, and then the pre-op nurse handing it off to the anesthesia care team, which is another huge transition in healthcare, right? So you have to worry about the informed consent, which was a big process for us because we had to change our process, antibiotics, allergies, all of these details, making sure the right side was signed, making sure there's a interval H and P, which my surgical colleagues love that when I say interval H and P, it makes them happy to make sure they get ready to go to the OR. Everybody loves that one. But making sure all of that stuff is there. And then the other part was actually in the operating room, our simulated operating room, where they actually did the induction. And a lot of anesthesia is muscle memory too. So practicing administering the medications, hitting the button on the screen for induction, doing your intubation, hitting the icon for putting in the airway, and just actually making the tactile parts work instead of, the usual kind of course training, which is like, okay, yeah, intubated, click, 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 right? We try to make it actually back and forth. So it's a little more real and a little closer to the actual stress and what it was like to really do it. The other part that we realized is it's a lot of work to make electronic things work together, as demonstrated by even today, right? So having Epic work with an anesthesia machine to actually pull values, because that was another part of the skills we wanted was, do you know how to make sure the modules are coming over? Do you know how to make sure that the vital signs and the data is coming over to your anesthesia record? Because there's a way for us with anesthesia to actually pull the trams and pull data from different places. They're all part of the record. So that was some of the skills we wanted to do, not just the nuts and bolts of it. So the question is how do you measure it? So if I'm looking to try to make it less stressful for my colleagues. Unfortunately, a stress score kind of reminds me of a pain score, which kind of reminds me of me asking my wife, how does this tie look? Right? So it's like, a little sketchy. So we did our best to try to find some sort of validated tool that we could assess, are we making things better, right? Or what is your degree of stress? And what is your, is this workload, is this manageable? So we used a couple different tools. One is the NASA Task Load Index. Let me show you this. So this is based off of, again, aerospace engineering. NASA engineers, every time they revised a system, they would run initially astronauts, then pilots, now that's used in special forces and other things. And they would ask them to do essentially, it's like a VAS score about how much mental demand, how much physical demand, time demand, how was your performance, how much effort did you have to put in to get that performance, and were you successful? And how frustrated were you? So the idea is this is a survey we asked and gave to people in the pre-op, intra-op, all of these settings. And then we kind of did a modified generalized anxiety questionnaire. We tried to make it somewhat Epic-based. Does this thing make you feel anxious? Are you worried about this transition to Epic? Are you worrying about different things? Do you have trouble relaxing? And I'm here to say, I'm the data entry guy. That's why the results aren't out yet. Didn't want to give you that slide. So I'm a little behind. But one thing I can tell you is if you look at the slide number 6, the becoming easily annoyed or irritable one, so that score was high across the board. So asking people, are you easily annoyed or irritable, that was high. I don't know if it's just statistically significant, but I'm here to tell you, as the data guy, it was high. So with those, and then we did a roughly demographics page. Now, again, these are some kind of subjective variables, but again, the idea was to make it as consistent as we could. We're also looking at doing some other more objective data regarding trouble tickets and medical errors in the kind of perioperative environment. We're trying to do a little more of the data kind of harvesting of how often did we save any time in terms of trying to troubleshoot a record in the OR or in terms of correcting errors and things like that from the actual Epic system. So again, those were the scenarios. And as I back up and look at it, and you're like, what does that mean? In Arizona, we did the simulation. And to my colleagues in Florida, I apologize. They did not do the simulation, so they were kind of our control arm, right? No slight intended. But the idea was, is there a difference between sites? So did our simulation here in Arizona make a difference compared to our colleagues in Florida, right? Because it's not very often that you have two pretty big healthcare systems transitioning to a brand new medical record at the same time. Right, so this was like a big opportunity, and again, it was a little bit of a rush to get even through the IRB, et cetera, in time. So with that being said, data. Currently analyzing data, that would be me. I have 142 surveys from period 1, which I've put in the system, and I assume in the Midwest somewhere is a big packet of surveys in transit from Florida. because we did the survey, the first 10 days after the Epic went live, and then the second survey was about 6 weeks plus or minus 5 days after that. And we're just looking for the disparity to see if, again, if the stress was difference between at the time of go live and if it made a difference in the long term. So again, there'll be more data to come as I process this and as we kind of have time to go through it. Special thanks to Amy Lannon and Dr. Stephen Porter. They're my colleagues in Florida. They did a tremendous amount of footwork to obtain surveys. And as you can imagine, getting a survey done at the time of Epic, how popular they were, right? Like bugging people to take the time to do this. I'm glad that none of them had any like severe injuries or pens thrown at them or anything. But again, special thanks to them for them taking the time to do that and helping work with me across the nation. And here are the references. So any questions or any other questions about that? Is that okay if time for questions?
Sure.
Okay. Yes. Oh.
Please hold.
Yes, let me go back to that. You can see what she's talking about right there,
Yeah.
the demographics.
Did you have a hypothesis about the age or what you're looking for differences, or what's up
I
with
don't
that?
know. Well, so it's interesting. Again, it's the same thing about. There's a lot of temperament that I learned too looking through this, because some folks have been doing it for so long. They're like, "Man, you can't hurt me." Right? That's kind of the vibe I got through their surveys. Like, "Meh, ain't nothing. You got it." And then there's some folks that are like, "This is driving me absolutely nuts." Right? Where I'm very agitated and very irritable. I anticipated there to be a little bit, perhaps a sway towards being more stressed as the farther I get to the right on my survey. However, I can't say that with any certainty that there was yet. But again, when I get all the stuff together, we'll look and see. Yes, we are curious about that one. Again, this is the only meeting I've ever been to where you're encouraged to be on social media during the actual talk, right? So we'll kind of see how that goes. So thank you. But yeah, I don't know yet. Uh-oh.
Just really quick. Really quickly, I just want to commend you because we do a lot of simulation and we assume that the results are going to be positive. I think that those of us that participate so often, we just assume like it's the right thing to do. It seems intuitive that this would have helped, so it will be exciting to see your results.
Me too.
And I think just again, the insight, taking it into the place that you actually work, the in situ is so kind of new to us. We don't do that very often. Our group is exploring that. So did you find that was challenging to take it into that environment, to take the mannequins, to take the actors out of the sim space and put it in the real live environment?
Yes. Yes. Again, the electronic logistics. We were driving our facilities guy a little bit nuts of really trying to get things to work and to pull over to the monitor and to actually read. Because it is, I mean, especially this time, the Epic transition hadn't taken place, right? By the time we were doing our simulations, none of the stuff was wired for it yet. So we were kind of preempting that, which may have been easier, right? Because maybe it was a kind of a rough go at it for him too to make sure everything pulls over. But yeah, so it was different for sure. And again, we only had one space. The other thing that we learned, the biggest thing that limited it was time, right? You've got to give your learners time to do it. So our interoperative nurse cohort was very small because we couldn't find time to get the interoperative nurses to come over there and practice getting that report, for example. The pre-op and the PACU nurses, for them it was a big deal, and for us it was a big deal. But for the interoperative nurses, it was hard to get them free to just come and do it and to actually go through the reps. So there was a couple things, different environment and then time for those people. Okay.
Well, Dr. Crater, thank you
Thank you.
very much. So, Justin, are we moving up to Rochester?
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you, Dr. Crater, for a nice presentation. This really is pretty cool, this set of presentations that we've had in this section this evening. It's kind of neat to sit back and reflect how we've talked about the different domains of interprofessional education and how that aligns with our mission here at Mayo Clinic. We've gone in to have a presentation about what tools we have access to, where we can find those tools. Importantly, one thing that I'm really interested in is the questions to consider when we're talking about what tools are we going to employ for our specific context. So the idea that we're going to be purposeful about the technology that we're going to implement, I think that's been something very central here to the Education Technology Forum over the years. And then lastly, I think we've just had a nice presentation on how can we, adapt this to our clinical practice, our clinical environment. So again, drawing that connection between the education that we're doing and then the actual patient care that we're influencing. So could I have the next slide? We're going to, I want to kind of celebrate our evening with mentioning our Twitter presence this evening. There's been a number of images of the sketch notes that you guys are all creating being shared out. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's give each other a hand of applause here. I want to just call out 2 tweets that I've seen so far tonight. First, I want to call out Tara Brigham in Mayo Clinic, Florida, who is one of our medical librarians that really tweeted out, medical librarians are a natural IPE partner. Libraries are often spaces where all medical disciplines go to. We also love connecting with specialties when teaching. And then because I, as most of you guys know, I'm the bow-tied bandit of blood here at Mayo Clinic, so one of the transfusion medicine docs, I can't help but give a shout out to Dr. Rivera, who's one of our trauma surgeons, tweeting out, if we train together, we work better together, learning about interprofessional education. So some awesome tweets coming out. And also to highlight, if you're not signed up onto Twitter yet, I definitely think give it a shot. But it's, even without signing up and registering, you can still see these tweets. You can go to twitter.com and in the search bar, type in that Mayo Clinic ETF, and you will see, without having to register for anything, what the content is that's getting pushed out this evening. Could I have the next slide, please? So we're going to take 4 minutes here now at your tables and check in about the sketch notes that you guys are creating, give you a little bit of time to reflect and talk with your conveners about how this is going so far.
Thank you, Dr. Kreuter.
Wired up. Yes, yes. Yeah, so we'll finish this up and we'll... All right, this is wonderful. The collaboration, the communication, and the work together is wonderful. Hopefully, Rochester and Florida, you're all set. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. And one of the interesting things is that I didn't know that you're kind of a crafty person who weaves and knits, but you're going to bring all this together. You're going to bring teamwork together, values, role definition, communication, principles of collaborative communication, and emerging technological advancements in patient care. David Sklar is a renowned physician, educator, and thought leader and scholar. Dr. Sklar is the editor-in-chief of the leading medical education journal, Academic Medicine. You're a professor at ASU, you work in the College of Health Solutions, you have numerous leadership positions in the field of emergency medicine, you're on a number of advisory councils, and it really is our honor and pleasure to have you join us tonight and give us your view of both IPE as well as medical improvisation. So welcome, Dr. Sklar.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Zimmerman. Yes, when I was told that I was going to be putting together interprofessional education, care, and improvisation, I thought, I don't think this could be done. I don't think it's really possible. And then I actually started thinking about sports, and in fact, that is what happens for a lot of our teams. A lot of the sports teams are improvising. If you think about basketball or football, there are always things that happen that either the quarterback or one of the other players hasn't anticipated, and they have to improvise. But they're able to do it because they have a team that also has improvised with them. So in any case, I have the title here with Learning from LeBron because I felt like that is one of the ways that, in my mind, I was able to put this together. The other thing I just want to say before I start is I don't think I've ever done a keynote in the middle of a conference. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is a little bit like halftime at the Super Bowl, right? Paul McCartney, and so I'll be that person. So anyway, that's sort of how I'm thinking about this. So I'm going to be talking about why do we need teams, and the very fact that I'm asking you this question is, should make us think about the fact that at least some of us think that that it's a problem. We wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't a problem, and if there weren't problems in the healthcare system where we thought maybe they could be a solution. So I'll come back to what I think maybe are the solutions, and right now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the problems are. So there are problems in our healthcare system, and those are partly because we're living longer, so we have longer lifespans, and as part of longer lifespans, we have other problems that have come along with that. Chronic medical problems, people with multiple chronic conditions, complex care, increasing costs because as we have more chronic conditions and more needs for care, that becomes more expensive. And then the question is, okay, with all of that, what can teams do to help reduce cost and improve care? This is just a little illustration of how our lifespans have changed over the last 50, 60, 70 years. So in 1933, you can see in the red, there were a lot of young children actually dying fairly early on. And then people died over time. It was kind of a broader peak. Now we've moved that peak over to the right, and it's really much more narrow. And that's good. I mean, that's a good thing. But it also tells us that since we're living longer, we're accumulating more problems that are going to end up needing to be addressed. And unfortunately, as we have encountered that, we've had increased costs because as people live longer and develop more problems, that's costly to take care of it. But in spite of the fact that we're spending more money, the quality of care is not as good as it should be. And that's one reason why teams are now being looked at as maybe a possible solution. Also, access is a problem. Another potential solution could be teams. Burned out health professionals, and this is something we've recognized over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years. In fact, my journal, Academic Medicine, we have gotten a real spike in submissions around burnout. Burnout is one of the hot topics, and in fact, we have several of our colleagues in Rochester who've done a lot of work on that. Dr. Derby and West and several others. And then the workforce deficit that I think we've already talked a little bit about, but this is a problem that I believe we are going to be confronting. I'm going to show you some data about that. So first of all, as far as cost goes, this is just an illustration of the increase in cost. In the U.S. is the black rectangles. We're obviously leading the pack in terms of increasing costs, but all of our comparator countries are also going up. Costs in healthcare are going up all over the world, probably mostly because of the aging and the increasing chronic conditions and so on. Unfortunately, the U.S., even though we're spending more money, our quality measures are not very good in most cases, and that is a problem. And we also have health inequities, which means sometimes you can have people living about a mile or two apart and having 15 years of lifespan difference. And a lot of that is because of social determinants of health, the fact that the environment is maybe less secure, there may be environmental stresses, water, air, things like that, and also behavioral trends, things that people do, drinking, guns, things like that. The disparities are also things we see from country to country, and although those have narrowed, they're still quite substantial. The U.S. obviously is way over on one side, and but a lot of other countries have really lagged behind. Burnout, I've mentioned burnout. We don't really totally understand why burnout has become such a serious issue for particularly our students, our residents, and our faculty, but I think we're noticing it, and we're hopeful that more team-based care may help us address burnout by moving some of the activities, whether it's patient care activities or interaction with our medical record, EPIC, et cetera. Maybe our teams will be able to help unload some of that. And then the workforce deficit, estimates are that we'll probably have about 100,000 fewer doctors than we need over the next 10 to 15 years. That's a big deficit. And at the same time, we are increasing our production of physician assistants, nurse practitioners substantially. So there's an opportunity there. If we're willing to work well together, we can probably solve this deficit, at least a big part of it, with interprofessional teams. But there has to be sort of the motivation to make that work. And we do have a lot of examples where interprofessional teams are working well. I've certainly seen this in transplant, for example, where everybody kind of knows their role. It's a small group, unique kind of patients, and same thing with critical care, people who work together, train together. So I think that we do have some really good examples. Unfortunately, I think they're probably the exception. There's also been some people who are working in the area of chronic care. Chronic care doesn't always go so well as far as teams, but there are some good examples there too. And I have the building blocks from Tom Bodenheimer, and as you'll see, the one red block, the first one, is that you really need leadership being engaged right from the beginning and getting everyone else on the same team. And then there are a bunch of these blocks are actually quite helpful, but data is important, and population, health, things like that. I worked on a project similar to this when I was in New Mexico called the Care One Project, and I'll just tell you very briefly a little bit about that, because we were confronted with this problem of a whole group of patients that we took care of who were costing us over $100,000 a year. Now, if they were paying patients, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, but mostly these were uninsured patients, and they were costing over $100,000 a year. And I talked to the CEO of the hospital, and we decided that we could look at these patients, and maybe we could do something that would reduce their costs. And so we identified who they were, so we needed to start with data. And then we developed these interprofessional teams, nurse case managers and social workers, pharmacy, and we gave them first priority into our specialty care. So to get in to see the cardiologist or the GI people, they got the priority as opposed to some of our other patients who were getting priority. And what we found was they went from $100,000 a year down to $20,000. There's an even lower. And you can see that graph that displays it. So it can be done, but again, it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have support from the leadership of the institution. And in this case, because these were uninsured patients, at least initially, now we do it on all the patients on the Medicare and Medicaid because it's better care. But initially, that wasn't how it was, but we were able to get them all behind this because it was a good savings for the institution, which we could then use for other projects. So it all sounds great. However, there are problems in interprofessional education and interprofessional care. And probably the biggest one is that there have been these battles over power and dominance. And what I mean by that is that at least the perception from many of our colleagues, nurse practitioners, PAs, and others, is that the physicians are sort of holding them back, not really allowing them to be what they could be and give what they could give. And that has really limited the ability of the interprofessional team, who they, I think, all feel could provide better care if only given the opportunity to do it. Paradise and Whitehead, we actually just published in Academic Medicine an article from them where they identified 6 areas where interprofessional education was encountering some barriers. The first was that logistics were a big problem. Logistics meaning very difficult to get everybody together in the same classroom at the same time because just different schedules, things like that. And then the question of developmentally, are we really ready to learn interprofessionally at the very beginning of training, or do we need to push that back a little bit into more of the clinical settings? Because a lot of our interprofessional education, at least initially, has been during the preclinical years. Maybe that's not the best way to do it. Then looking at the outcomes, we haven't gotten a whole lot of research that proves that interprofessional education really does improve outcomes. We need that research, and we need to actually understand that a little better. Another thing they noticed was that the theory behind this maybe wasn't as robust as it should be. So the theory that a lot of people use for doing this is contact theory, that by putting people together, that it kind of will lower the barriers and increase trust. It didn't seem like that was really working. And in fact, sometimes the contact was leading to the opposite kinds of emotional feelings. Power, the issue around power, we haven't really talked enough about it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later. And then all the inertia of change. Any of us who've tried to change curricula at medical schools know how much inertia there is. It's a real challenge. Tom Bodenheimer, who's been one of the leaders around chronic care models, what he recommended was that we really need to push interprofessional education into the interprofessional care environment and have separate clinics for patients with complex health problems. And in those separate clinics, we could create a culture where there would be interprofessional discussion and trust and case conferences. And that was sort of something that he's done, that he's found was successful. Another thing we have to think about with interprofessional teams is that one size does not fit all. So if you're taking an interprofessional team into the trauma unit or the emergency department, there you really need kind of highly structured authority, because you're dealing with issues that you can't debate them at the time that you're dealing with them. There has to be kind of a clear line of authority. On the other hand, if you're in a rehab unit or palliative care, there is more opportunity for a less structured authority kind of model. Then another thing to think about is that the financial aspects of all of this haven't really been discussed adequately. And when we look at the distribution of spending in healthcare, it is not distributed equally. There's a very small group of patients. 1% of patients are responsible for about 14% of our care. 50% of patients hardly spend anything, about less than 5% of all care. Well, the reason that's important is you're not going to have the same team doing the same things if they're taking care of the lower half, the healthy half, as opposed to that 1%. And that was one of the keys of that Care One project that I told you. Is we did something very different. If we had done that same thing for a healthy population, we would really be using too many resources to take care of people who really didn't need them. And of course, the older you get, unfortunately, the more expensive you get. You start developing more chronic illness. Now, of course, the problem here is that geriatrics, where we're trying to train people to take care of these older patients, our payment model is not very supportive of that, because these patients who are older and have multiple problems take a lot of time to figure out what the best approach for them is. So what about finances? Are we really sharing our finances in a way that encourages our teams to work together? And I would say that probably we aren't really doing that very well, so that we're not really sharing the money in a way that encourages us to work as a team. And there are different payment models that we use in healthcare. One of the ones that you're probably familiar with is fee-for-service. So fee-for-service, you get paid if you do a procedure, you get paid for that. The more you do, the more you get paid. And I'm going to move over to I'll come back to this, but I'm going to move to a sports analogy here. So in basketball, let's say that we paid the players by the number of points they scored. So the more you scored, the more money you would get. Now think about that. Would those players pass the ball to each other? Probably not. Would they play defense? Probably not. There's really no incentive. So I think that is kind of the problem that we're having in healthcare, is that if I'm getting paid for doing procedures and there's a nurse practitioner or a PA who could help me and maybe make me more efficient, but they're going to take away that procedure for me, maybe doing that operation, that suturing, whatever it might be, then I may be unwilling to do that, because, again, I'm getting, my incentive is around doing more and getting paid more. On the other hand, what if I got paid, what if these basketball players got paid only if they won the game? Would that change their behaviors? Or what if they got paid the same amount no matter what? So they basically got the same salary, whether they won, whether they lost, whether they scored. So think about, how would those different payment models change their behavior? And then you can see from this other slide, that's really what we have in medicine. We have all of these different payment models, and they often are conflicting with each other. So in some cases, you may have the doctors getting paid in one way, say fee-for-service, the hospital getting paid a completely different way, like capitated or bundled, and the nurses and the nurse practitioners, they may be getting paid by the hospital as a salary. So there's not an alignment, and what it means to win is not the same thing for all the people in the team. And so then that, I think, leads to some of this problem of conflict and power that I talked about earlier. Well, anyway, now I'm going to shift to improvisation, because, and I'm going to try to link these together a little bit here. So improvisation, why is that important? Well, teams are always improvising. Even though they have plans, things happen that they couldn't have planned for. You know, the quarterback drops the ball, or there's a fumble, and all of a sudden they have to just do things. And the nice thing about teams is that they practice with that in mind. Are we ready for improvisation when we walk into the room of a patient who is supposed to have one particular kind of problem, and they say, well, actually, I came in here to talk to you about something completely different, and then they present that to us? Well, this is, I think, where improvisation could help us if we are prepared for that to happen, and I think probably many of us are, but not everybody. So training for improvisation can probably help make that a little bit better. Now, there's a concept known as adaptive expertise, and I think adaptive expertise is in many ways a kind of improvisation. Adaptive expertise means you have expertise. You're the expert. Maybe you're a surgeon, and you do a particular operation all the time, and you do it well. But adaptive expertise means that you can do that, and then when something comes at you that's completely unexpected, so you're expecting to do An appendectomy, you open the patient up and instead there's a cancer there, or the patient is bleeding. The adaptive expert is able to change what they were doing, change their priorities, and take their expertise and apply it to this new situation. And teams that can do adaptive expertise are able to then do that at the team level. So in the sports analogy, all of a sudden the offense in football notices there's about to be a blitz, and they change their blocking pattern, and the quarterback changes the play, and that's what adaptive expertise is all about. Well, are we able to do that in healthcare? I don't know that we are all that well, because unfortunately we don't necessarily all train together, and we don't even know each other. I know that when I walk into the emergency department, many times I've never worked with the same people who I'm now going to work a shift with. There's different nurses, different residents, everybody. Now, we all kind of know our roles, which is helpful, but it would be so much more helpful if I had worked with these same group of people, and they trusted me and I trusted them. And so I think it is kind of unfortunate that we don't do more of that kind of thing. And I think that ultimately that's the solution for us, is those kinds of things. And unfortunately, a lot of our training is really more about individual expertise. It's really not about team expertise. So I'm going to end with one other experience I had. I went to an orchestra performance, and it was wonderful. It was in Santa Fe. And about halfway through the last piece, a lightning storm hit, and all the lights went out. Completely dark. And I think everybody just thought, okay, that's it. They're going to stop playing. That's the end. But the orchestra didn't stop playing. They kept playing in the dark. And not only did they keep playing, they played well. They were able to improvise. And in fact, it sounded even better. Now, maybe it was because we couldn't see, so all we could do was hear. but it was fantastic. And they got really excited and motivated. And it was one of the best performances I'd ever heard. But again, that was improvisation, and it was adaptive expertise, because they had practiced together, they knew each other, and they got excited about it, and it worked well. So I think, bottom line here is that I think teams can be a solution for a lot of the problems that I identified. But for that to work, we really need to be aligned in terms of what it means to win. Winning isn't going to necessarily mean me getting more money in my pocket. It means all of us win together. And if we win together, the patients will win together, and that will be, sort of the common goal and get us to where we need to get to. So I'm going to end there, and thanks, and it was really a lot of fun to be here today. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sklar. You've really kind of shared and given us a lot to reflect on. I think you've really pointed out a lot of the challenges that comes with interprofessional education, as well as then what the opportunities for us educators are. And hopefully everybody is doing this with our sketch notes. I've seen lots of tweets and images of sketch notes developing over the evening. And as we are in an interprofessional group, now I'm going to invite Dr. Rand and Dr. Schreier to come up and to lead us in some medical improv. And something that I'm going to be doing at my table is really kind of thinking about what does this mean for me, for my teaching, for my patient care, and my well-being.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Carter. And thank you so much to the team, the planning team for ETF, for inviting us to be here tonight. We're really excited to talk with you about one of our passions, which is medical improv. It was an honor to follow Dr. Sklar, too. Thanks, Dr. Sklar, for those words. I'm Jo Ryan. I am a theater academic by training. I started my professional life with a PhD in theater and directing. I have directed productions where the lights have gone out in the middle of the show and we had to improvise. It's not fun, but we did it. And I think we've all seen a lot of really good quality improvisation here tonight. How about a big round of applause for the team for improvising through Well done. Well done. So, as a theater academic, I've long had an interest in the role that improvisation can play in improving communications. I saw that in my students on a regular basis, that it could improve confidence, it could improve authenticity, and the ability to clearly communicate. And when I came to Mayo, I started thinking about, I think there's an application here for improvisation, but I didn't know at that time that there was, in fact, a movement happening in the United States advancing the use of improvisation in healthcare and medical education. I also didn't know Gene Dankbar at that time. Gene can't be here tonight. He sends his greetings from a beach somewhere in exotic Dominican Republic or something. But Gene and I could not be more different. If you know him, you know that he's an engineer. He's not a theater person. He's not an academic. But he is very passionately interested in improv, so much so that he took it upon himself to sign up for workshop sessions at Brave New Workshop in the Twin Cities and commuted on a weekly basis to take improv classes in the Twin Cities for, 6 months or so. He and I were introduced, and we started talking about improvisation and our passion for it and its application in healthcare communications. And we decided to initiate a series of workshops for Mayo staff and students. So that was 4 years ago. We offer monthly workshops to anybody who is an employee or a student. No prior experience is required. Every time we meet, we go through introductory exercises and then move on. And some of those exercises are the ones that we'll introduce you to here tonight as well. I just wanted to say a really quick word about the history of improvisation, especially in the context of IPE. People probably don't realize that improvisation actually began in the United States in the 1920s as an educational strategy. There was a woman whose name was Viola Spolin who worked at the Jane Addams Hull House teaching immigrant children, and she had some theater background, and she began to work with those children with improv activities and games to unleash their creativity and to give them confidence in communication and improving their language skills and team building skills. And out of that began a movement. She actually began to teach improv activities for actors in training. Her son was Paul Sills, who was one of the founders of Second City in Chicago, and you all know that Second City spawned a whole group of people who went on to Saturday Night Live fame, including Dan Aykroyd, the Belushi brothers, Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey. All of those people came through improvisation-based training at Second City, which goes directly back to Viola Spolin and her work with children. One of the things that she talks about a lot is the idea of accessible intuition, and we'll come back to that tonight a couple of times. So with me this evening is a fellow improviser, Verena Schreer. She is a national champion in the Netherlands in improv and an MD. And she works with Jean and I in facilitating the improv workshops. I also want to give a shout out and the other sides to Chris Yates in Florida and Kit Cuff in Arizona. They are my colleagues. They, like me, are the program directors in humanities and medicine, and they too have improv activities available. So if you're interested in those sites, contact them for more information. All right. Our objectives for this evening are to experience the practice of medical improv, and I want to emphasize practice because what you're going to see tonight is the tip of the iceberg. It's just an opportunity to acquaint you with some of the activities that we do, but the emphasis on practice is because this is a lifelong practice. Yes, you can walk away with some good tips from one session in improv, but it really is a practice of communication. It's a communication skill. So again, I encourage you, if you're interested, come join a workshop either here at Mayo or elsewhere. It's an ongoing learning process. There's a handout on your table throughout the evening. Jot down ideas that you have about the ways that you think medical improv can tie back to the competencies in IPE or to your own context. And we will also provide additional resources for you to learn more about medical improv. Now, what is improv? Improvisation is the act or art of improvising, of composing, uttering, executing, or arranging anything without previous preparation. Again, going back to Viola Spolin's accessible intuition. So, quick question, we have a poll. How many of you, apart from the improvisational experience of tonight, have participated in an improv experience? Now, this could be at a comedy club, at a party, as an icebreaker, or actually in any more formal training. So, any experience prior to tonight in improv? I'm sorry, the question is, have you or have you not? So, yes or no. And who's reporting back to us on that? Stacy? Ready? Do you have an answer? Do you have responses?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. We have 56 people who are reporting back yes, and 53 who are saying no.
Wow, an even split almost. That's fantastic. I'd love to hear more about the experiences that you have had. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later on. That's great. For the rest of you who haven't had any experience in improv, the good news is, yes, in fact, you do improvise every day. Every time you have a conversation, you're improvising. So you're all experts already. No worries. More good news. Regular practice of improv leads to confidence in communication, and it builds skills in authentic, adaptable, and clear communication. All right, so comedy versus improv. What we are not asking you to do. How many of you have seen this show? Whose line is it anyway? Yeah. We're not going to ask you to be Wayne Brady or anybody else on this show. There's a significant difference between improvisational performance, and improvisation as a communication skill. We're not asking you to be funny on demand. We're not asking you to stand on stage alone and perform. In our workshops, we practice very safe practices. We never ask anybody to stand alone on stage. We always work in pairs or small groups. That's what we're going to do tonight. We do our best to minimize the chance of humiliation, but the reality is this improv is a great equalizer. We're all equally at risk of feeling silly together, and so we will. The bottom line is that because we're in healthcare, we're not necessarily working with scripts. There are lots of gray areas. There's a huge amount of ambiguity and uncertainty. We never know really what we're going to hear from a patient or what the patient is going to say. Sometimes procedures go wrong and you have to pick up the slack and just wing it. Improv helps us to become more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. So, what is medical improv? Katie Watson at Northwestern University is a Second City alumni performer and faculty member and attorney by training, who also teaches at the medical school at Northwestern. She started teaching improv for medical students about not quite 15 years ago, and realized that there was a very high level of receptivity among the medical students for this kind of work, and value, that they found significant value in practicing improv as they went through the medical education. She and Belinda Fu from the University of Washington together organized to teach a Train the Trainer course for those of us who wanted to bring improv back to our healthcare environments. I took the course in 2014, met Jean, we started the workshops, the rest is history. So medical schools and physician leaders all over the country are introducing trainings in medical improv. Here at Mayo, we've offered it not only through the workshops, but in medical school selectives that we've taught and some resident physician trainings that we've offered. And what we find is that medical improv is always rated most highly of all of the humanities experiences that we offer, rated most highly in terms of utility for the practice. So what's so scary about doing improv? Well, mostly it's the fear of the unknown. We're afraid of not being in control, and we're always afraid of being laughed at. But again, the safety measures that we practice in our workshops and classes is that nobody's on stage alone, and we do our best to minimize those fears. So, principles of improv in action. Affirming statements, yes and. We'll practice yes and in a few minutes. Thinking on your feet, learning to be nimble. Focused listening or active listening. Actually listening to what the other person is saying rather than rehearsing your response in advance. Being present in the moment, not being distracted by your grocery list or what the dirty clothes that your kid left on the floor, etc. And collaborative problem solving, which is all about teamwork. Yes, I think we'll move on. Verena?
Yeah, so these are the overlapping areas between improv and your professional skills. And if you're not yet convinced, it's kind of hard for me to say, well, I think that I'm right because I do it. So we have some statements from colleagues who've either taken our class or our workshop, and they've been wonderful in putting it into words. And just to highlight a couple of things, one of the physicians said, improv sharpens your listening skills. And notes that I kind of jotted down with that is wonderful. As improv is building a scene together, improv can also help you get your conversation into like a constructive mode where you're adding building blocks in order to get a step ahead. One of the patient educators said it's about doing the best that you can with what you have. And Dr. Claude just mentioned the adaptive expert or the adaptive expertise team, and I think that that's a wonderful example. Sometimes you're presented with an option or words or suggestions that you wouldn't necessarily have chosen yourself, but that's just what you have and that's what you got to do. In improv, everything that is said to you is a gift, and you have to receive that and accommodate that and move on. And then finally, from one of our residents, they said it warrants trying to be more positive in a challenging situation. And I think that that's really that yes and attitude. It's a constructive attitude you bring to a meeting, or if you have a project that you have to figure out together with people from different backgrounds, that yes and mentality can really help you figure that out. So, let's get to it.
Let's get to it. So we're going to give you some instructions and then have you actually jump into this. Verena and I will also demonstrate. In a few moments, not yet, I'm going to ask you to stand at your table as you're able or comfortable. And you're going to work in partners. So if you have an uneven number of people at your table, work with it. You can do this in small groups of 3.
Improvise.
Ideally, you'll be working in partners. And remember, this is a safe space. We're not going to ask you to do anything that you're uncomfortable with or you don't feel comfortable doing. And I will also ask you to remember that we are on Mayo property and we will adhere to the Mayo values. So keep it clean. If you go to a comedy improv club, they're not so clean. But here at Mayo, we do clean improv. And finally, we're all in this together. It's the great equalizer. So this word toss is essentially a word association. And the idea is that you're going to turn off your internal censor, your internal editor, and you're going to try to allow yourself to speak the first word that comes to your mind. It's a word association game.
Clean.
Clean. Don't feel pressured to blurt. You know, you can if you want to, but don't feel pressured. But don't allow yourself to flip through 6 choices and then settle on one, okay? That's not what this is about. It's about instinct and following, trusting that instinct. So, Verena.
So, Joe, let's go with Apple. Oh, Verena, research fellow. Am I improvising? Are we doing?
Are you giving me apple?
Yes, apple.
Red.
I love.
Heart.
Ship.
Boat.
Captain.
Sailor.
Aye aye.
Yar. Okay. So it. So the point is, this is not high intellectual activity, right?
No.
Okay. So don't get hung up on beautiful poetic words, all right? This is just whatever comes to mind, and you want to get it out there to keep things going. And the fun of the exercise is to see, what kind of crazy directions you go in. So if everyone would stand. And I will also say that things are going to get noisy. And so please keep an eye on your convener who will bring you back when time is up, okay? So go ahead and work with apple. The first word is apple. Go. I think I cut a different section out, and so about 7:45-ish, and we can keep going to about 7:45. So can we do yes, bud? Move on. Okay, I think we should move on here. Okay. Yeah, let's. Oh no, we're not yes, but we need to be yes and. Can you go back? Go back to yes and. What's this?
No, the mouse.
Can I go back? We need to.
No, as soon as the timer begins on I can.
She said you could click through the timer. We need to be done with this, and then we want to go to the yes and slide. Yeah. Yes, good. Okay, well done. So, how did that go? Can I hear? Don't get too comfortable. You're going to stand up again. But I'd like to hear a couple of comments about how that was. How did you experience that? Can we hear from some conveners? Do we have a convener? Yes, yes.
I could share an experience that Liz and I had that often we, I think, could picture what we were, the first thing that came into our mind, but we couldn't think of the word for it. Like the little towel that the waiter has over his arm.
Oh, yes. What is that? A linen? A wine towel?
We went with towel.
Yeah. So how did you address that conundrum?
We kind of just quickly explained it, even though, until we figured out what the word was. Because it was still the first thought that popped into our head.
Good. Excellent. Good commitment. You could, in that case, have gone on to the next word that came into your mind if you wished, but thanks for hanging in there with it. Other
I've got a
comments?
convener
Yes.
here at our 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun with it, but it was awkward in the beginning.
What was awkward? Can you say more about that?
But we did a group of 5, which I thought was really fun. Because we just didn't want to do, the normal.
So the awkwardness was just sort of getting started and getting familiar and getting the energy going, or what was it?
No, I would say, if you got a word like someone gave me cash and I just went, ching. And then the next person didn't know what to do, so I don't know.
That's great.
I said R, so don't worry.
So are we going to hear from the other two sides? Do we have time to do that? Where's Alyssa? No, we do not have time. Sorry. So let's move on. But I think the point that I want to make is that this feels awkward and uncomfortable to us because we so seldom give ourselves permission to speak the first thing that comes into our mind. And there's something really freeing about that if you can give yourself the opportunity to exercise that in a safe situation. Okay, next exercise is yes and. And again, don't stand yet. You will be standing, working in pairs. This is a short conversation that you're going to have. The first person will make a statement about a topic that we'll give you. Every subsequent statement after that in the conversation will begin with yes and. A couple of things to remember: don't ask questions. Make statements. Yes and statement. Yes and statement. Again, don't feel that you have to have a high intellectual conversation. It doesn't even have to be based in reality. It can go off into fantastic directions. The important part is that you're listening to each other. You're making statements that begin with the affirmative yes and. Verena and I will demonstrate. So, what's our topic? Driving a car.
Yes, and?
I drive a car to work every day.
Yes, and I heard you just got your driver's license renewed.
Yes, and I hate my picture.
Yes, and I figured that you probably should not have worn that cowboy hat.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So opening statement and then yes and, yes and, yes and, yes and, yes and. Okay? It does require some close listening, right? And presence. You can't craft your response in advance. Okay. So stand up, find a partner. It is possible to work in groups of threes. And your topic, can you hear me? Your topic is planning a party. Go. So we'll have to come back to yes, bud. Yeah. So she said we could go until 7.
6 minutes ago, she said half. Oh, she said 30, I think, actually. 7 more minutes?
Oh.
So take your time.
Yeah.
And the visit to the other sides is just gonna you tap it off to. Yeah.
So I think we don't need this much time. I think we don't need this much time. I think they're winding down.
I'm not sure if they're controlling it. As in whether they. Oh, yeah, there we go. 1 more minute.
It's a long time.
Let's go party.
Just FYI, we're going to throw it to Florida first, and then we'll solicit some comments from Arizona,
Perfect.
and then we'll come back here,
Perfect.
and then we can kind of, and then go to the next.
Okay.
So before we do our stuff, before we do Rochester, we're gonna go to.
Yep.
And I'll say.
Perfect.
Yay! Good job! Excellent. Okay, have a seat for just a moment.
Yes, and we want to know how that went for you. So we're going to hear first from Florida.
All right, great. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
We have Mr. Greg Sneed with some perspective.
I get the need to be a better listener. But, instinctively, I think I really wanted a little time to prepare my answer. So I found myself kind of fighting the improv part of it, to be honest.
Fighting the end part of it? Is that what you said?
The whole improv part.
Oh.
I wanted a few moments to prepare my answer. So it
Yeah.
was really tough to get in that mindset.
Yeah. It is tough. We're trained away from that. Yes. And other comments?
Now to Arizona.
Yes, we have a comment. Yes, and maybe.
And I just want to say we're going to have a great party.
Yes. Yes, and can we come? That's great. Okay.
Yes, and you'll pay for it.
Okay. Comments here in Rochester? How'd that go for you? Yes.
I think it was very hard for me to make sense of what my other team members were saying. And I know you said in the beginning it would be hypothetical, but I just wanted it to be more realistic. We were trying to plan a party for doctors and including some bouncy houses and some lemonade. So we were debating if we should have it in the summer or the winter month, and should it be open to the public? Should we offer CME and all those kind of things?
So in other words, it felt a little out of control in terms of party planning. Yes, yes, yes. Sarah has a comment over there.
I found that my statements were a lot of times yes, and the and came a little bit later. So that was a bit challenging.
Because that gave you bought you a little bit of time. Is that what it is? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's fine. That's fine. Okay, this is good. Verena and I are going to demonstrate. We don't have time for you to do this exercise, but we're going to demonstrate the yes, but, and then we're going to ask what you see as the differences between them. It's just a slightly different construction. So, what's our topic?
I'd like to prepare a lasagna tonight.
Yes, but you know I'm gluten-free.
Yes, but I thought that was just a phase.
Yes, but my phase can last as long as I wish.
Yes, but I think you're over-exaggerating.
Yes, but perhaps it would benefit you to try a gluten-free diet.
Well, yes, but...
Okay, what's the difference in tone? Negative, confrontational. It slides pretty quickly into adversarial qualities. And admittedly, we love to play that up because it's fun. But how often do you think you say yes, but in a day? A lot. A lot. Particularly in our culture, which is competitively based. But is a debating term. Yes, but it's a topping. We can go the next level. We can top that comment. We can be better than our conversant, etc. I suggest that if you practice yes and Verena suggests, and the rest of you here who've done improv know this, I'm sure, that if you can practice using the construct of yes and, it can change the tone of your conversations and it can change your life. I think you don't have to say yes and, but if you think it and imply it, you can affirm a statement without actually saying those words. I guarantee you, those of you who have adolescent children at home, it will change your life. I know. But I think that the affirming listening is the important skill that we're trying to get out. Now, we often hear, especially from physicians and residents and medical students, you can't always say yes to a patient. So, in that case, we understand that the yes is an acknowledgement. It's an affirmation that you have heard the statement that's been made. The and is a bridge to what we hope will be a shared new perception or a shared new reality. Dr. Zimmerman used this example yesterday of a patient who doesn't want to stop smoking. Yes, I understand that you have some concerns about not smoking, and let's talk about some strategies that you might begin to feel comfortable with. So you don't have to agree that it's not the time to stop smoking. Okay? Moving on. Where are we? One-word stories, last activity. This time you don't have to worry about working in pairs. You'll work at your tables. You're going to tell a story one word at a time. Now, the tendency is going to be always to skim right over those minor little words and go for the big words, the glamorous, sexy words, the verbs, the nouns. Don't be afraid to say it, the, a. Okay? Those are important words, too. One word at a time to tell your story until you get to a period. Okay? And then you can keep going if time permits. Again, you cannot anticipate your word until it's your turn. You have to respond in the moment. You have to listen actively and be present in the moment. So, are we demonstrating or no, we're not demonstrating. We're just going to do this. So, let's have a topic.
First day at Mayo.
Anybody's first day at Mayo. It doesn't have to be your first day. A first day at Mayo Clinic. Okay? Stand up and do your one-word stories.
All right.
Yes, and.
Part is going to be really important is
Oh, we're not having four.
There's a person with like a tiny triangle there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It was really fun to listen to some of those stories. So we're going to move now into your table activities. Working with your worksheets, we're not going to talk right now about these one-word stories, but as you begin to look at the application of the exercises, I want you to share some thoughts about what was hard about this, what was wonderful about this, what might be relevant in your work with this one-word story. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the conveners to conduct a table conversation about application. So thank you. Okay, good job. Wonderful. And we're going straight to Florida.
Hello there.
With the questions, and then Florida will
Are you ready for your?
okay. Great. All right, good. So we would love to hear some of your findings, some of your comments, some of the comments that you wrote on your sheet, observations about any or all of the exercises. Love to hear it.
So we have a report out here.
Thank you. Yes, so this was regarding the one word that we just did. And one thing that we talked about at our table is how it makes you feel vulnerable. Specifically, if you're working as a fellow in surgery, you're used to being very calculated and not knowing what the next thing might be. If we had a common goal, if we knew what we were doing, that would be helpful. But this is kind of, you're not sure what's going to come next. You're not sure what the next person is going to say. So having a focused topic is more helpful. But again, it makes us feel very vulnerable.
Thank you. And I'm curious to know whether you can find any benefit in that feeling vulnerable.
We agreed at this table that you can, absolutely. There's application for it, and there's benefit in being vulnerable.
Such as?
Yes, and well, certainly opening your perspective to other ideas, to things that you maybe wouldn't have thought about, being so calculated, but just opening other possibilities, that type of thing. That's just my perspective. I don't know if my
Great,
colleagues have something
wonderful.
else.
Thank you. Yes, yes, yes.
I have one other report out.
Okay.
We have one here too.
We'll come over there.
I thought I was going to get out of this. So we talked about how we could use these improv concepts as educators rather than our response really to those. So we had conversations about essentially doing improv while they're doing case studies. So as they're practicing skills, you're throwing other things in there for them to practice, like practicing sterile technique. Now the person you're working with just broke sterility of their gloves. How do you respond to that while you're doing this other skill, and throwing those things in there? Also using like the word toss, going around the room. If you are teaching about concepts, to kind of reinforce some of those terms and different things, to be able to use that. And also like a one-word response as almost an assessment of how well people are learning what you're teaching. So you throw a one word out to them, see what responses you get, and that can help you understand where people are at in really hearing what you were saying.
That's excellent. Yes, great suggestions. Thank you. I think that these are the one word toss and the one word story are excellent discussion group tools, as you said. Another way, another game that we play sometimes is a parody play, taking a scenario that everybody knows well and then flipping it and creating a satire or a parody. And parody, if you can parody something, you know it really well. So if you can parody a lesson that you've all been learning together, that's another really good technique. Yes, over here.
Yes, we talked briefly about using the word tossed as a brainstorming activity. So looking at it from a project team, bringing a group of people who haven't met in a room before. It's a warm-up activity, and kind of get a good idea of where do we want to start or what do we need to work on.
Yep, good, good. And these are all good icebreakers, too, for the first day of meeting. If you want people to start to feel comfortable with one another pretty quickly, you can use these exercises. Excellent. Okay, now are we going to Florida?
Now going to Florida, yes.
Okay.
So we'll pass things over to you, Catherine. Zach?
Yes. Can you hear us okay?
Perfect.
All right, great. So we have Tracy Robinson and her table.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to make a brief comment about what we've learned here from the exercise. And one thing that we didn't touch on was the one-word stories and what it could do as far as team building. It helps or it encourages out-of-the-box thinking and creativity. That's some of that's one thing or two things that we thought based on the exercise that it could do in a team setting. So we just wanted to share that with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
And now for Arizona.
Yes, we've got Dr. Shaw with a comment.
So we discussed a couple of things. One was we really liked the one-word stories. There was something about the experience that we thought it'd be great for icebreaker, definitely, but it also got the group to kind of reduce the ego of each of the individual team members, because you might want to take the story in a direction, but you only have one word to take it.
Yep.
And the only time I was successful was with the word pink, and the next person said tutu, which is the word I wanted next. and you know, but most of the time the story wouldn't go where I wanted it, and so just in a very short time, you're like, this is about us. This is not about me. And I think that was very powerful, an unexpected outcome of, I think, that experience. And then the yes and is so applicable to clinical settings and affirmation and motivational interviewing and getting people to do behavior change. So I think that link is very, very useful, as I think was already mentioned.
Super. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and any other comments? Great. Okay.
We have one more from Arizona.
Okay.
Can you take one more from Arizona? Dr. Orford.
Yeah, Bob Orford. I just wanted to comment that I listened to a TED Talk 3 or 4 years ago on speaking with Alzheimer's patients or people with severe dementia. And the comment was made in that presentation that if you have a patient with dementia, you always use yes and. You never use yes but.
Good point. Yes. And as the daughter of a patient with Alzheimer's, I improvised like crazy with him, and it was very successful. So, okay, I think that is it. We'll wrap this up, and I wanted Verena to say just one thing really quickly about why she, as an MD, practices improv on a regular basis, and so much so that she wins national competitions.
Right. So yes, I started doing medical improv same time I started doing med school, and I found it to be a really nice way of venting, getting out of the stress of the day, getting rid of that, and just having fun with other like-minded people on stage. But as I continued doing that, I saw more and more overlap between the skills that I was being taught on stage to be funny and have it as a performance tool. But I really kind of shifted towards, this is actually very helpful for me, in my professional day-to-day life as well. And I hope if there's anything that you guys can take away from today, first of all, I hope you had fun. And second thing that I really hope that you guys take away from this is that medical improv is a wonderful tool that you can put in your belt to have fun and be constructive about your thinking, your way of talking, in your day-to-day life. And maybe on an end note, I know it's late, but you guys all stood up, you did improv. Who wanted to do improv at 7 p.m.? So a big round of applause for everyone here who participated in these challenges. And I just noticed that we have like a live instrument, like the percussion section over there. I thought it was like a recording, but it's actually you on that thingy. So applause for her, yay!
Thank you so much. Thanks. If you have any questions about how to get into one of our workshop classes, contact Kit or Chris or me, and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Riam and Dr. Schreier. It was wonderful to see everybody really connecting with medical improv, which for me, to give a confession, I had my first medical improv just the other week. So here in Rochester.
You rocked.
Thank you. I'm a slave to my calendar. Somebody put it on my calendar. So I walked into the room and I felt actually quite at home, which was really something. And to reflect on, the next day, I was at an education science journal club where we were kind of talking about what's the difference between medical improv and simulation. And you can kind of see that really it's a very different experience, yet we're developing some of these very same skill sets with active listening and being adaptive. So with that, I wanted to turn this over now to Dr. Zimmerman to kind of bring a cap to this meeting.
Well, Justin, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for participating, because it does take a bit of effort to get up, not necessarily so late at night, but to get up in front of each other and put yourselves on a bit of display. I think every site had a good time with the last few exercises. In closing, I think that you all recognize that Mayo Clinic is the leader in solving complex problems, but really to do that, we have to use all the tools in the toolbox. And as we learn more of ways that we can teach, instruct each other, help each other, we do become better providers of healthcare. A few comments in terms of the things we talked about tonight: medical improvisation, interprofessional education, and collaborative learning platforms. I think there were a few words that really hit home to me. And again, obviously, from the interprofessional education, learning with, learning from, and learning about understands who we are working with, because no one takes care of patients by themselves. And if our core business is taking care of excellent patients and doing excellent patient care, we have to maximize and utilize all the skills in the toolbox. That's all the individuals that partake of healthcare. That's all our partners, because we are an integrated practice, because we have multiple individuals with wonderful skill sets. I had, at the beginning of the conference, made a comment about Mayo Clinic's expectations of all employees, specifically with regard to patient experience. When patients come to Mayo Clinic, they come for the best medical decisions, the best medical options, the best medical treatment. But they also come to Mayo Clinic for the best compassionate medical care. The exercise in improvisation lets you listen actively. You take an aggressive stance to listen, because if you don't listen, you can't play that game that you just had so much fun with. So you must listen. But the same thing goes for a patient conversation. You must listen. It's very important to affirm that you heard what they said. It's important that their decisions and their perspectives have a significant role in their health care. Even if it's a person who doesn't want to stop smoking, you need to affirm that that's their perspective. Ideally, it'd be nice if you can turn the tables, but you must listen to the patient, and then it is a bit of a skill. So, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Oh, thank goodness someone said something. Yeah, practice. These are not skills that you do in one exercise tonight and you're an expert in improvisation. You don't know everything about medical interprofessional education. It does take some work, and we have lots of resources. And hopefully through the conference tonight, we've given you opportunities to explore resources, to utilize resources, to have interinstitutional education. I'll really expand on that one. No, so ASU is very kind and let us have some of their resources or access to their resources and give us some of their knowledge and expertise in sharing where interprofessional education really makes a difference in the world of medical education and in medicine. With that being said, I do think that it's really important that in 2019 we think about connecting with each other, continuing to practice these skills, and to teach these skills. I don't know how many of you know, but interprofessional education curriculum is a requirement for medical students now. So it's not just something that's a fad. It's not just something that, oh, well, we should do this, because we practice interprofessional practice, or we use interprofessional practice in our day-to-day care of patients. But it doesn't come automatically. You have to understand that you have to work to develop interprofessional education. So you do know what someone else does to maximize the benefit that Mayo Clinic can offer our patients. In 2019, we should be inspired again to connect with each other, connect with our learners, and connect with the community and our patients compassionately. Education technology allows us many tools to optimize patient and personal connections, social learning, and adaptive applications to practice. We can build and reinforce competencies, foster innovations, discovery, and accelerate problem solving and healing. So looking forward, artificial intelligence, telemedicine, virtual reality, those are some of the things that we're looking into going forward. As learners, educators, practitioners, scientists, and caregivers, we must strive to work together, be adaptive, harness the power of education technologies and the basic principles of effective communication as we take care of our patients. So we have 2 minutes to go, and I think actually I'm a little ahead of schedule. A couple of things. You have received an email very recently. It's about a 2-minute email. Please, it's a very quick one. It's not a lengthy course evaluation. Please put the comments down to help us form a better program next year. And then I have to give an extensive amount of thanks. I can't say enough to all the people that worked on the conference this year. Dr. Justin Kreuter, my co-host in Rochester. We have virtual host Stacy Johnson, Carrie Bowler, Teresa Mallon, Dr. Kreuter, and the social media team, always ever present in the Ethernet and the Internet of Things. All of our conveners were great help at all the tables, made a big difference in helping you do the activities of Our session leads, Dr. Ryan, Gene Dankbar, in his ability to try and contribute to this, did a great job. Bella Punchmatia, Katie Peterson, all the communication people, marketing, registration people, Jeannie Potaruca Carter, Becca Gass, all the people that have helped us to facilitate the meeting. Huge thanks to Heather Billings, Jocelyn Vart, Zach Houston, Catherine Bachman, and our 2019 Master of Masters, Alyssa Hall, a true fantastic partner in education. And most of all, to you in Florida, in Rochester, and here in Arizona, I really want to thank you for attending tonight. Hopefully, you both enjoyed and learned something. Hopefully, you take away something that you can then teach as well. As we begin to pack up and leave for the evening, we're going to play a little video that has a summary of the sketch notes of the creativity that was generated during the evening. If someone drew characters of any of the hosts or speakers, please don't show them for too long. But again, and please feel free to fill out that application of that little email questionnaire. And any of the comments, Rochester, thank you very, very much. And Florida, thank you so much for staying up to know those work that we put in the mail.
Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman, and we will turn things over to Jason and for the video.